I've been pretty vocal about my love for the Assassin's Creed and Zelda games, but one series I don't talk about all that much is Star Fox, despite how important it was to me. I remember getting an N64 for Christmas one year, and the first game I played was Lilac Wars, to the point where I ended up being late going to my grandma's for the meal because I was still playing. I felt like making a tier list, and thought this would be a nice chance to talk about my love for the series, or rather my love for a couple of the games and general distaste for the rest, but we'll get into that later. What I'm going to do is go through the games in release order, talk about why I like or don't like them, and then move on. I'm not going to break down the gameplay for each as they're largely the same, but for a quick overview, the Star Fox series are mostly on-rail space shooter games, though with some dalliances with other genres here and there. I'm also going to rank a bonus game at the end, which you can probably guess what that is. So, let's begin. Star Fox. Despite having owned a copy for the best part of 20 years, I only actually played Star Fox for the first time last year. Because of that, I find it kind of hard to talk about. Do I try to view it as a product of its time, or do I talk about my experience with it now? We'll go with a little of both. It's undeniably impressive for an early SNES title, and kicked off a franchise which I love, but I also just don't like playing it. It's pretty rough in some places, poor performance and odd design, but it's still pretty good even now. That being said, I don't really have any urge to go back to it really, but at least it'll serve as a good baseline. Lilac Wars. It's just the best one, isn't it? Like, it's not even close. This is the first game I remember finishing, and I'd regularly just chain runs on a weekend back to back over and over. It's actually harder for me to talk about this game than it is the others, purely because I tend to focus mostly on their issues when I discuss them, and Lilac Wars doesn't really have any. I can think of two, actually. The fire waves in Solar come way too high up on the screen for you to comfortably fly over, and Zonas can be pretty rough if you go for all of the spotlights. Outside of that though, the game is simply outstanding, and is clearly the best entry in the series. Star Fox Adventures. I have incredibly mixed feelings about Adventures. On the one hand, it wasn't even supposed to be a Star Fox game, and on the other, it's the game that gave us Crystal. I honestly kinda like it just for the way General Scales says his name. All this being said though, it's just not that great. It gets progressively worse the further in you get, which is a shame, and Tricky can be super annoying to use. I do think the game has some cool ideas and areas, and it introduced what would become a pretty iconic character to the series, and it's also the game which gave us the longest time with Fox, which is to be appreciated, but it's decidedly average if we're being honest. Star Fox Assault. Assault gets a bad rap. It's definitely a bit odd with the weird metallic insect aliens appearing from nowhere, and somewhat tedious in some areas if you don't know what you're doing, but it's just so much fun. The wing riding missions are a particular favourite of mine, especially the one where you join forces with Starwolf and ride on Panther's ship. The story also goes some insane places, particularly in the final mission where you fight the Queen of the Aperoids while they masquerade as Fox's dead father. The on-foot missions could be pretty poor, but I even enjoyed those to be honest. I used to be able to beat the game without being hit just through the sheer amount of time I'd spent in it. Of all the Star Fox titles, this is the one I've played the most, but it's just not quite as good as Lilac Wars overall. Star Fox Command. I almost feel bad for putting Command here. It's not really all that bad, I just don't really enjoy it. It's definitely the entry in the series which I've put the least time into, just because I didn't really get the control scheme, and I'm not particularly a fan of it being on a handheld console either. I had similar issues with the Lilac Wars remake on the 3DS. At the very least, this game has some of the most ridiculous endings of any title, including Fox and Falco becoming racing drivers, or Crystal joining Starwolf before leaving the galaxy and becoming a bounty hunter named Cursed. And that's Cursed with a K if you're wondering. While I'm not a fan of the game, nor the direction it takes the characters, at the very least I can appreciate how dumb it can be in places. Star Fox Zero. This is honestly one of my biggest disappointments in gaming. I was so excited for a new Star Fox game, and this one had additional development by Platinum too, so my hopes were really high, only for it to turn out to be unwieldy trash. This is one of the few games I've tried which I find legitimately painful to play, and that's the primary reason I've never finished it. It doesn't help that the game wasn't really all that compelling either. I tried to love it, I really did, but I can barely even muster enough about it to care. Easily my least favourite Star Fox game, and sadly probably the last true entry we'll ever get in the series. Star Fox Guard. Guard is weird. It's not a spin-off, more of a tech demo if we're being honest, and it's also just not very good. It has some interesting ideas at the very least, especially if you split the gameplay between multiple people, with some looking at the main screen to tell you where the robots are coming from, and yourself taking control of the different cameras to blast them away when they get too close, but it's just not fun. As a free game bundled with Zero, I can't judge it too harshly, and at least this one didn't cause me physical damage, but honestly it just gets boring very quickly. Star Fox 2. I actually really enjoyed this. I wasn't expecting to at all. I'd only ever heard that it was kind of rough and hectic, but it was a fun time. Not to say it was without issues, it was incredibly confusing at times and has some legitimately infuriating mechanics. I understand that things happen to attack Corneria, but making them happen even while you're in a mission is pretty rough. The sheer amount of damage these attacks can do is way too high as well. Finally, the space battles are super hard to follow properly, though they're basically redundant seeing as every mini-boss dies to a single bomb. While I've said a lot about the issues I've had, this is still probably my third favourite entry in the series, which kinda says a lot about the quality as a whole. Starlink Battle for Atlas. I know this isn't a Star Fox game, but it's the best we're probably ever going to get now, and it had that DLC set in the Lilac system, so it counts as far as I'm concerned. That being said, I find this game incredibly confusing. The Toys to Life stuff is a blatant cash grab, and the combat is kind of rough, but flying the ship actually feels really good. I first played this at Gamescom in 2018, and it controlled very differently then, and was legitimately bad, but at least now it doesn't feel quite as terrible. There's also some clear issues with the game surrounding the Star Fox implementation. The game wasn't designed for their inclusion, so cutscenes are just interspersed with footage of Star Fox every now and again. Also, because the blasters are part of the wings and not technically weapons, you can never modify or level them up, leaving them stuck with the same pathetic damage over the entire length of the game. Really though, I only bought it because it comes with an R-Wing model, and it's a very nice model too. I hope someday we get some more love for the Star Fox series. Mario and Zelda get pretty regular titles, and even Metroid is getting a new game soon, but Star Fox hasn't seen a good new entry in almost 15 years. Star Fox 2 is pretty good, but it's clearly from a time when Nintendo at least cared about the series. Now it seems mainly used as a vehicle for new technology, and it does the characters and world we care about a great disservice. At the very least, I suppose I can play as my boy Wolf in Smash Bros if I really want, or replay one of the old games, but it's such a shame the way this series gets treated. I'm just making myself sad at this point, so I'm going to go look at fan art of Crystal to cheer myself up. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my patrons Heaven Over Hell, Justin Wood, Hobbs, Koopy Vegeta, Gunrunner, and Water.
General Scale! Yeah!